Hello everyone, and welcome to our video on navigating conflict and crucial conversations. In this video, we will explore the different types of conflict that you may encounter as a member of a student organization and strategies to address these conflicts. Let's jump right in. First, it's important to acknowledge that conflict is a natural part of working on a team. Conflict can range from a difference in opinion to a deep-rooted disagreement over what should be done. When conflicts are left unacknowledged or unresolved, they can become barriers to action and achieving results. However, when conflicts are addressed effectively, they can lead to a stronger team and a more effective work environment. For this reason, when we think about conflict, it's important to use a growth mindset. Try to think about conflict as an indicator that you or someone on your team is passionate about something and desires to see it change. Even if you may not initially agree on what that change or method of change should be, you can agree that the topic is an important one to address. In addition, without conflict, the status quo often remains. So try to think of conflict as an opportunity for collaborative change. I know, easier said than done, right? While addressing conflict and having crucial conversations can be challenging, there are tools available to help you navigate the various types of conflict that you may experience during your time as a student org leader. We'll review those strategies next. In order to better understand some of the core types of conflict you may experience as a student org leader, it's helpful to refer to Christopher Moore's Circle of Conflict. This breaks down the common types of conflict we experience into 5 categories. These categories are data conflicts, interest conflicts, values conflicts, structural conflicts, and relationship conflicts. It also offers ways to approach each type of conflict when your organization experiences them. Being able to pinpoint the type of conflict that you are experiencing in your organization will help you determine the best way to approach that conflict, and hopefully it will lead to an effective conflict resolution and a stronger team dynamic. We will go through each type of conflict in detail. First, we will discuss data conflicts. Data conflicts typically arise when there are challenges collecting data, interpreting it, or there are different views on what data collected is relevant. Data conflicts can also arise when important information is missing or flawed. For example, as a member of a student organization, you may be interested in collecting data on the types of activities that members of your club want to participate in, or you may want to collect data on what topics members want to discuss in an upcoming meeting. Let's say that your organization decided to conduct a survey to gather information on those topics. Conflict may arise if members of the club disagree on the relevance of information that was collected from the survey. Some members may think that the data collected is valid because it was based on survey responses. Other members may disagree with the relevance of the information collected because they have spoken with members of the club and the information collected from those conversations contradicts the information collected in the survey. This is an example of a data conflict. When data conflicts occur, there are a few useful strategies to address them. The strategies are as follows. You can discuss data challenges. Try to figure out where the root of your problem lies so you can address it. In our example, the challenge is arising because some members of the club think the information from the survey provides the best information, while others think the information gathered from conversations is more helpful. Next, encourage use of the best available data, or work together to develop better data. To do this, you'll need to discuss the pros and cons of using each type of data available so you can move forward in agreement about what information is the best to use. You can also work together to create a new way to collect data so that you can collect data that all members agree is relevant and usable. In our example, the group may have a conversation and decide that none of the data they've collected is useful, and instead they might decide to host a focus group with guided questions. Finally, try to find a common criteria for the evaluation of data so you're all on the same page once data is collected. In our example, the group would need to agree on how to interpret the information provided during the focus group in order to have data that they would find useful. Next, we'll talk about interest conflicts. To understand interest conflicts, we first need to understand the difference between a position and an interest. In conflict, people often voice what they want to see happen. This is considered their position on the situation. Positions are usually statements, demands, or wants. Positions typically articulate what a person thinks the outcome of a situation should be, but they don't address the underlying reasoning or feelings as to why the person is set on a certain outcome. The underlying feeling or reasoning would be the interest. We can think of an interest as the underlying why. It is often based on experience or a need that isn't being met. In interest conflicts, conflict often occurs because someone's why is challenged, or the group is unable to address the why because they're focusing on the position instead of the interest. To address interest conflicts, consider using the following strategies. Focus on the interest and find multiple ways to address that interest. In doing this, you are looking to understand the why. Ask each party to express what they need or what the underlying issues are that are not being addressed with the current situation. Once you understand each party's interests, you can propose multiple solutions in order to resolve the conflict. For example, if your student organization is planning a speaker event, a conflict may arise if a member of your organization states that they will refuse to attend the event unless Beyoncé is the keynote speaker. The rest of the planning committee may become frustrated with this member because they don't agree that Beyoncé should be the keynote. If the organization members focus on the position, Beyoncé needs to be the keynote or I won't come, they may not get very far. However, if they begin to explore the underlying interest to understand why that member thinks Beyoncé needs to be the keynote, they may get farther. Perhaps once they start exploring the why, they learn that this member wants Beyoncé to speak because they think students won't know who any of the other speakers are, and they're hoping to invite someone whose name or work students will recognize. Or maybe all of the other speakers are actors, and the students think a singer who has also acted will be a more effective keynote because the club has had just an actor every other year, and they want to do something a little bit different. Understanding this why creates room for collective problem solving and collaboration. For example, the group could now look for other singers, or they could try to find another keynote whose name people will recognize. Next, we'll review values conflicts. Values conflicts are often one of the most challenging types of conflicts to address, but they're incredibly important. Values conflicts arise when people have different beliefs or ideas about what is important. Some signs that a value conflict may be present include someone leaving the room without any obvious reason, strong disagreements arising about what is right or wrong. You may notice that certain members of your group are consistently avoiding discussing certain topics, or that people have defensive or guarded reactions that prevent them from discussing certain topics, especially if those might touch upon their perception of the way the world is. To address values conflicts, we recommend the following strategies. First, identify the conflict. From there, the parties will need to have a conversation. During this conversation, each person should try to listen actively and to speak from their experience. They should also try to share why their values are important to them in order to help the other person understand and see from their perspective. As they're listening to the other person's story, they should try to withhold judgment during their conversation. From there, the individuals can work to accept their differences while also identifying areas where they might agree. Focusing on areas of alignment will be helpful when working together in the future. It's also important in these situations to acknowledge that there may be times when values conflicts are just too deep and difficult to resolve. And in this case, you may need to figure out how you can work together despite these values, or realize that working together might not be the most beneficial in that situation. Let's give an example. So imagine you're a member of the Beach Cleanup Club and you're planning a fundraiser to support ocean conservation. If one member of your organization's executive team values creativity and another member of your organization's team values tradition, they might come into conflict when approaching the project. The member who values creativity may want to try new approaches to planning the fundraiser, while the member who values tradition might want to approach the fundraiser in the way that it's always been done. In this case, neither approach is right or wrong, but each approach shows different values, which may lead to conflict between the individuals who are trying to plan the event. By using some of the strategies listed above, the members may be able to have a conversation to better understand each other and to realize that while they don't agree on the approach to the fundraiser, they do agree that sustainability is important, and therefore they can continue to work together and collaborate, even if it's challenging. Next, we have structural conflicts. Structural conflicts typically arise when there is ambiguity about how things are set up or the roles that people hold. These conflicts may stem from an unequal distribution of authority, work, or resources. For example, Structural conflict could occur in a student organization if members of the executive board perceive the president to have all the power and they become frustrated because other executive members don't feel that they can contribute to the decision-making process. To address structural conflict, it's helpful to name the structural factors or ambiguity affecting the behavior that you're seeing. From there, your team can work together to change that structure. To do this, the team will need to eliminate and replace any destructive patterns of behavior that they're able to identify and/or introduce a fair decision-making process. In our example, it will be helpful for the group to name that they feel the president has more power than the rest of the team because the president's making all of the decisions. From there, the team will need to figure out why that's happening. Maybe the roles of the other executive members aren't clearly defined, so the team members don't know what areas they have the ability to make decisions on, and so the president is jumping in and making decisions on everything. In this case, by redefining roles, the group may be able to share the decision-making process more effectively. This also could be happening because there's no decision-making process in place. If that's the case, you may need to add structure in order to add a way for groups to make those decisions. One common way to do that would be deciding to vote on certain issues. Overall, when you have a structural conflict, it's important to find the root of the issue and to find ways to address it directly. Lastly, we're going to review relationship conflicts. Parties who have had previous challenging experiences with each other are often the most prone to these types of conflict. Often, strong emotions, misperceptions, personal animosities, or poor communication can contribute to these types of conflict. In your student org, you may notice that relationship conflicts are occurring when people choose to sit somewhere to avoid someone, or when there's an awkward silence when someone is speaking, or when people are making tense eye contact with each other during conversations. There also might be tension that you feel that's unrelated to the topic at hand, and you're not sure why. This also could be happening when members of a student organization try to avoid working together for reasons unrelated to the task at hand. If you find this occurring, you should try to resolve the relationship conflict, and here are some strategies to do so. First, notice when there is tension between you and someone you're working with, and then have the courage to name the conflict and to address the conflict with that person. When doing this, try to focus on discussing emotions and naming any harms that you have experienced. For example, you might say, I felt hurt when the executive board decided to go out to dinner and didn't invite me because it made me feel like I wasn't a valued member of the team. As you're discussing relationship conflicts, try to practice active listening and try to work towards solutions together. Also, it's important to try to change how parties perceive each other if this is at the root of the relationship conflict. To do this, you may need to have a conversation so both parties can understand each other and where each other are coming from in whatever issue is at hand. It's also important to try to inspire a positive approach to the problem. For example, if there's a repetitive negative behavior that's happening, try to have the parties work together to find a way to address this behavior. And if the issue is based on misperceptions, try to work together to address those in order to have the parties better understand each other. Whenever possible, we encourage you to utilize the conflict wheel when challenges arise in your organization, as understanding the type of conflict you are experiencing is vital to determining the best way to approach the conflict. In the quiz portion of this module, we'll give you the opportunity to practice identifying the 5 types of conflict and solutions for each. Next up, we're going to offer some general tips to keep in mind when navigating conflict in your student organization. Alright, so to close this video, we're going to offer some general tips for navigating conflict. The first tip is to establish the type of conflict you are addressing and select an appropriate mediation strategy. Naming the conflict and acknowledging its existence is the first step in addressing the problem. From there, determine what type of conflict you are experiencing using the conflict wheel and identify some ways to approach the conflict. After that, you'll need to gather key stakeholders to discuss the issue. If you feel that a mediator or facilitator is necessary in directing the conversation or offering a neutral perspective, include them in the conversation. Facilitators can be a neutral member of your organization or your advisor. You can also reach out to the SAI staff if you need help finding a neutral party. Next, we recommend setting ground rules for the conversation. Some recommended ground rules include speaking from your experience, so try to share your experience whenever possible rather than trying to name the experience of others. Along similar lines, use I statements. When you're using I statements, you should try to focus on your experience or what you perceived, how you felt about that experience and what you liked or did not like and why, what you would like to see happen differently in the future, so what you need from another person, and what consequences you would feel if things didn't change. As you're having this discussion, you should also try to practice active listening and to use nonviolent communication. So an example of nonviolent communication would be saying, I felt angry when this happened, as compared to saying, you made me angry when you did this. One places blame on the other person, while the other focuses on how a certain approach or action made you as an individual feel. And that is considered nonviolent communication. Next, try to keep your perspectives open. Try to help both parties see the situation from their own perspective, and also try to see things from the other person's perspective. It also might be helpful to try to see things from a third-party perspective, so thinking of yourself as a fly on the wall in the conversation or the conflict. Lastly, try to focus on facts to guide the conversation rather than the stories that you might tell yourself. All right, once you've done this, you may still need to define the problem. So to do this, you'll need to identify both the positions and the interests. To identify positions, have each person explain how they see the situation without interruption from the other. If you have a facilitator, you might want them to ask each person what it is that the other person doesn't understand yet that they want them to hear. Then you'll need to identify the interests. As a reminder, interests are generally the underlying needs, expectations, apprehensions, perceptions, or goals that lead a person to hold a certain position. To do this, have each person talk about their expectations, needs, perceptions, etc. without interruptions from the other person. After this, the facilitator might want to summarize what they heard after each statement, or they might ask each party to summarize what they heard the other person say. This will help clarify individual needs and ensure both parties are practicing active listening. From there, look for common themes amongst both parties if they exist. The facilitator may also need to identify key areas of disagreement or difference so the parties can continue to work through them. When both parties are ready, begin to look for a solution or a way to move forward. This will often involve creating an action plan that both parties can agree to. As you create the action plan, think of ways to evaluate the results or points where the parties can check in, either with or without a facilitator. This will hold everyone accountable to the plan and create space for future dialogues. Remember, navigating conflict and challenge in your organizations is tough, but it can lead to valuable growth for both the individuals involved and the organization. Try to use a growth mindset whenever possible and focus on the positive outcomes that can come from conflict. Also, if you ever need help navigating a conflict, please don't hesitate to reach out to your advisor or a member of the student activities and involvement staff. Now that you know the different types of conflict and strategies for addressing each type, it will be helpful to understand your patterns for addressing conflict. In part 2 of this presentation, we'll give you the opportunity to explore this. Prior to jumping into the next presentation, we ask that you take an assessment to understand how you respond to conflict. From there, we will review the different ways people respond to conflict, and we will talk about the strengths and challenges of each approach. In doing this, we hope to offer you the tools to be both reflective and effective in responding to conflict.